On Friday's show, we made the point that much of the news Americans are told is factual turns out to be propaganda. That seemed like an obvious point. Human beings lie. That is their nature. Powerful people tend to lie quite a bit in order to protect their prerogatives. Journalists, who have the power to shape perception, are especially vulnerable to dishonesty. You ought to watch them carefully. There's nothing especially controversial about that observation. It's obviously true. And yet, maybe not surprisingly, a lot of reporters found it deeply offensive. Michael Barbero of the New York Times called it, quote, repugnant. As he put it, it's, quote, literally damaging to our democracy that anyone would doubt the accuracy of his newspaper. Question the New York Times, and America falls apart. Pretty funny. In other news, the Carrier Corporation has announced that it's immoral not to use air conditioning. Buy our product or you're going to hell. In fact, as is so often the case, the opposite is true. Skepticism is not unpatriotic. It is your duty. Principled questions don't destroy democracy, they sustain it. The people in charge don't like to be second-guessed, and why would they? A skeptical population makes their lives more complicated. They'd like you to swallow your medicine without complaint. Shut up and obey. Don't ask questions, accept what you're told, and get back to work. Well, that's a lot to ask, especially coming from the New York Times. There's a lot of interesting detail in that newspaper day to day, and good for them for printing it. But there's also an awful lot of lying, especially about the big things. Remember the New York Times spent an entire year assuring us that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction? We went to war over that. Many thousands died, and it was a lie. Or how about when the Times told us that Barack Obama's toppling of Muammar Gaddafi would turn Libya into, quote, a productive partner with the West? Well, it'll be interesting to know what the families now being sold in Libya's open slave markets think of that prediction. And who can forget this Times headline from the spring of 1975 when the Khmer Rouge took over Cambodia? Quote, for most, a better life. Well, a third of the population went on to die in genocide in Cambodia. The Times has yet to issue a correction. Nowadays, the Times is hyping the Russia hoax, telling us that Moscow is the greatest threat to this country when it's clearly not. The paper is trying to provoke yet another pointless war in Syria by pushing the claim that Bashar al-Assad gassed his own people. Times reporters pretend to know for certain that that happened, that Assad did it. They don't know that for certain. Once again, they're lying. We could go on. We're not making a partisan point here, by the way. The New York Times is hardly the only powerful institution that distorts the truth. Someday soon, for example, maybe this week, the Republican leadership in the House may announce an amnesty for more than 1 million people in this country illegally. They'll tell you that letting foreigners ignore our laws is good for America. Don't believe them. They're lying. Our country has changed a lot, and the divide is no longer between Republicans and Democrats, or even between left and right. It's really between the incompetents in charge and everyone else. A small group of people has become rich and powerful mismanaging this country. And in fact, I've written a book about them. It's called Ship of Fools. It's out in the beginning of October. You can order it now if you want. But in the meantime, remember that you don't reflexively owe anybody your allegiance outside your immediate family, and that includes the news media. You don't have to hate the people in charge, but be sure to stay skeptical. They lie a lot.